Hi, I'm Adi Ignatius, Editor-in-Chief of Harvard Business Review, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity today to speak with all of you at the Global Views Leaders Forum. I haven't been in Taipei in several years, but I do hope to get back there soon, and you have to know that Taiwan is an inspiration to all of us in the U.S. The topic of my talk today is the new normal for business in a post-pandemic world. Let me start by saying it's too soon to have certainty about any of this. First, we aren't yet post-pandemic. Post-peak, yes, I hope, but we're certainly still dealing with COVID-19. Second, there's no clarity yet on what the new normal is or even what it should be. But there is a great deal of experimentation underway, and we're seeing some interesting trends that I'm happy to share with you. I also will share some of what I'm hearing from a few of the CEOs who are shaping this new world of business. In this talk, I'd like to cover a few separate aspects of the new world of business. First, I want to talk about the evolving role of capitalism and the new expectations for business. Second, I'd like to talk about the changing role of the CEO in today's environment. And lastly, I'll talk about the workplace itself and how it's evolving for a variety of reasons. So let's talk first about the big picture. In the US, at least, the very notion of capitalism is undergoing a rethink. For 50 years or so, we've lived in a Milton Friedman world. While Friedman himself wasn't completely focused only on shareholder gains, his followers were. And partly in his name, we've had this 50-year period in which companies have believed that it is their fiduciary duty, their only real duty, to maximize returns to their shareholders. The fact is that was never exactly the case. Yes, of course, companies and CEOs have an important responsibility to deliver to their shareholders, but the law doesn't specify that this requires a short-term, as in quarterly, maximization of profit over all else. Lynn Payne and Joe Bauer of Harvard Business School wrote a forward-looking article in HBR in 2017 called "The Error at the Heart of Corporate Leadership," that showed from both a legal and logical perspective the obsession with short-term profit maximization isn't at all what the law says, even in Delaware, the state in the U.S. where most Fortune 500 companies are based. CEOs have a responsibility to their shareholders, but an equally defensible and far more sensible interpretation is that this responsibility is for the long-term health of the company, as opposed to rewarding short-term buyers of the stock. In other words, the 50 years of shareholder primacy is more of a fad than a strict reading of the law. So since publication of that article, the conversation has gathered steam. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which is the world's largest asset manager with $9.5 trillion in assets under management, has been pushing loudly for a new era of broader stakeholder capitalism. The Business Roundtable, a prominent association of U.S. CEOs, similarly called in 2019 for business leaders to serve their full stakeholder base. None of these things by itself makes a difference, but the conversation has clearly changed how business is thinking about its role. So what will emerge from this? It's not yet clear, but what is apparent, I suspect, is that the previous phase, the Milton Friedman era, is over. The role of the CEO is no longer simply to please his shareholder base, his or her shareholder base. So it's up to all of us to determine what comes next. So think about the purpose of your company. Think about the contributions it makes, good and bad, to society, to the community, to the environment. Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever and founder of Imagine, a foundation that mobilizes business leaders around UN Sustainable Development Goals, has just written a book that is a playbook for this new era. Co-written with Andrew Winston, the book is called Net Positive: How Creative Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. Full disclosure, it's a book that HBR published. But its argument is this: rather than trying not to do bad, companies should perpetually ask themselves, is the world better off because your company is in it? All right, so with that, let's talk about the second aspect, and that is the role of the CEO. Now, this is changing in a couple of dramatic ways. First, there's the public role, and then there's the internal role. In terms of CEO's external role, and again I'm speaking primarily about the US and Western Europe, CEOs are feeling pressure to take a stand on social and even political issues far more than ever before. Here's why. Employees more and more want to work for a company that espouses their values. In other words, there's pressure coming up from the bottom for business leaders to speak up on key social issues. Second, customers too are making it clear that they want to buy from companies that share their values. One recent survey said more than 70% of consumers want to see that kind of alignment when they're making a purchase. Now, behind both of these trends is the rise of social media. Consider, most CEOs probably don't want to take sides in a contentious social issue. The old thinking was you might please half of your audience if you do, but you'd anger the other half. Michael Jordan, the basketball star who became the world's greatest sneaker icon, mostly stayed out of black advocacy issues, famously saying, "Republicans buy sneakers too." But times have changed. The rise of social media, particularly Twitter, makes it hard to stay silent. If you do, the Twitter mob will interpret your silence, perhaps in ways that you don't like. So neutrality isn't really an option these days. Better to speak your mind than have the social media mobs interpret it for you. So what should a CEO do? Obviously, you can't get engaged in every single issue, but you will need to be heard at times. And this has become a strategic imperative. Every CEO needs a playbook for this. Mike Toffel and Aaron Chatterjee did a great piece for Harvard Business Review a few years ago, laying out the risks and rewards of all this. They advised that CEOs should select issues carefully, reflect on the best times and approaches to get involved, consider the potential for backlash, and then measure the results. Their advice was not to avoid engagement, but rather to advise CEOs to get involved more effectively on the issues that they and their company truly care most about. And then there's the internal side of the evolving CEO role. Today's imperative is that CEOs display a range of new skills, like empathy, transparency, authenticity. The world is changing, and employees and boards and business partners value these skills now as much as financial and strategic smarts. Issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion are front and center for the C-suite and the board, and leaders need to develop better soft skills to survive, even more so as fragile and restless staff return to the office after the COVID-19 work-from-home period. We know that leaders can learn these skills, and we know that it's worth it. I recently asked Satya Nadella, who has led an astonishing refresh at Microsoft since becoming its CEO in 2014, what is the key to innovation? His answer? Empathy. As he put it, quote, "We have the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes and see the world the way they see it. That is empathy. And that is at the heart of design thinking." So now in this last part of the talk, I want to speak about how the very nature of work itself is changing. The pandemic has, of course, been a reset moment in many ways. It has challenged our assumptions about how we work, how we collaborate, how we innovate, and how we balance our professional and personal lives. Many of us are now wrestling with the question of returning to work. Should we come together in person? Should we remain remote? Is hybrid the way to go? There is no right answer, but as we all work out these questions, we need to think about why it is that we're asking people to be in the office. Is it to build culture? Is it to impart skills? Is it to experience those unplanned connections that spark innovation? Is it to experience nurturing human relationships? Nothing is automatic any longer. There's no default approach that necessarily makes sense for this era. So we need to be very intentional about what we do and about how we explain it to our teams and to our employees. During lockdown, we got to know one another. Yes, we were remote, communicating via Zoom or WebEx or Teams or Skype or what have you. But those technologies gave us a real window into our colleagues' lives. We saw their children, their pets, their spouses, their roommates, their homes. And Zoom can be very democratizing. We seem to have more opportunity to speak our minds remotely. Back to Satya Nadella again from Microsoft. He's trying to work out these issues at his company. And as he does so, Microsoft is generating and analyzing a lot of data related to the future of work. What's clear is that the data isn't really clear. For example, 70% of employees say they want flexibility in their work lives. That pretty much sounds like they want to be at home. At the same time, 70% say they want that human connection so that they can collaborate. So there's a real paradox in terms of what people want and what they say they need. Now, as we figure all of this out, we also need to acknowledge that our employees have been through a rough period. Mental illness has gone up. People have had more nervous breakdowns. All of this has hit women particularly hard. So employers need to think a lot about support, both providing resources and counseling, but also offering flexibility and time off for people to take care of their lives. HBR is very invested in helping to shape the future of work. We're publishing a lot of articles on the topic, and last month we launched a new show on LinkedIn Live called The New World of Work. So with each episode, I interview a top-tier CEO and pose some of the questions that we're talking about today. In the show's first 3 weeks, I've spoken with, again, Satya Nadella. I've spoken with Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, and with Paul Hudson, the CEO of Sanofi, the French pharmaceutical giant. And here's some of the themes that have emerged. First, as I said before, we don't have the solutions yet. Indra Nooyi urged leaders not to assume that they have the answers as to how to run their businesses post-pandemic. COVID-19 was the worst disruption most of us have faced. It will take time to get over it, to find our balance, to figure out the right mix of in-person and remote work. As she put it, this is a time to think about scenarios. This is a time to do a whole bunch of experiments on what the future of work and the workplace could be, and then to evolve the right model for the right jobs. Now, one other thing, employees have more power now. In the US, skilled workers are in demand. We're having trouble filling jobs. This moment is being referred to as the Great Resignation, which suggests that workers are simply leaving jobs that aren't interesting or aren't adequately lucrative. But it's not just that. People are also thinking about why they work. They're trying to redefine the real meaning of work and then trying to move themselves into jobs that better align with who they want to be. The old distinction of life on one hand, work on the other, now seems passé. No one quits companies, they quit managers. Now, Paul Hudson, the CEO of Sanofi, echoed all of that in our conversation. There is a war for talent out there, and it takes more than money to win it. As Paul put it, talent is asking to work at a purpose-driven company. It's saying, if I don't connect with why I'm here and gifting you precious years of my career, then I'm not staying. Paul said he personally finds all of this refreshing, and he's trying to meet the challenge. In other words, it's more difficult, but it makes us better managers. So to sum up, it seems clear that we're in a transitional moment in many ways. Some of the challenges may well prove to be temporary. But beyond that, we're in the process of creating something new. Business leaders are paying more and more attention to the concerns that employees and consumers are raising about diversity, about equity, about sustainability, about creating workforces that have purpose and meaning. In a year or two, I suspect we'll be talking more about the metaverse. That's, of course, the buzzword for a futuristic physical virtual mashup where we will interact closely with our friends and colleagues through perhaps an avatar or hologram via artificial reality or virtual reality. It sounds crazy, but Mark Zuckerberg is making a big bet on this happening, as are many others. But ultimately, the biggest driver of change may well be that big ongoing conversation I described earlier about capitalism itself. What do we expect from business? What do we require from business? The answers will vary from country to country, but in the West, the big issue is in play, and companies by and large are remaking themselves to accept a bigger role in their communities, a bit like capitalists did in an earlier era. To me, it's an exciting period, and all of us can contribute to its evolution. So I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.